The moment the courtroom doors opened, there was no announcement, no whisper, no tap on the shoulder. Just a collective shift in air pressure, like the building itself knew something was about to break. And then he walked in. No entourage, no sunglasses, no PR shield, just Jay-Z. He didn't look around for cameras. He didn't nod to anyone. He walked straight to the witness stand like he wasn't testifying, he was returning. The judge didn't speak right away. The gallery had already leaned forward before he'd even sat down. When he raised his hand to be sworn in, his eyes didn't go to the jury or the prosecutor. They went straight to Diddy, the man he'd once called brother, once built an empire beside, once defended in silence. Diddy didn't blink. His face, always unreadable, seemed carved from stone. But for the first time, it didn't feel powerful. It felt hollow. Jay-Z sat down slowly, not like a man with something to prove, but like one with nothing left to hide. The prosecutor approached, her heels clicking in a rhythm that felt like countdowns. "Mr. Carter," she began, "do you recall your first formal business venture with Sean Combs?" Jay-Z tilted his head slightly. 1999, he said. "It started casual, but we were both coming up fast. There was mutual interest and mutual leverage." The prosecutor nodded. "And since then?" Jay-Z exhaled through his nose. "It got complicated." Murmurs fluttered across the gallery, but no one dared speak above a whisper. "Would you say your relationship was built on trust?" she asked. His pause was longer this time. "It was built on usefulness." The silence that followed felt like a verdict in itself. "Did Mr. Combs ever confide in you? Involve you in behavior that felt ethically or legally questionable?" Jay-Z looked down for a beat, then back up. "There were things I heard, things I saw, and a lot I chose not to." "Why not?" she pressed. He leaned forward. "Because I was building my own empire. Because speaking out then would have been like setting fire to my own name. Because sometimes silence feels like safety until it's not." The courtroom held its breath. The judge shifted in his seat, barely audible, as if even his robe didn't want to interrupt. "Were there moments," the prosecutor asked gently, "you now regret staying quiet?" Jay-Z nodded slowly. "More than a few." The gallery didn't move. Even reporters lowered their pens, listening instead of preparing. "Let's talk about 2010, she continued. "You were present at an event in Miami that's now under federal review. Can you tell the court what you witnessed?" His jaw tightened. "I saw Sean bring people together for what he called a reset. There was liquor, music, phones taken at the door, but the energy wasn't celebration. It was surveillance. People were watching each other, testing each other." He paused, and his eyes clouded. "And then something happened upstairs. Screaming. A man ran out pale. Sean just laughed. Said, 'He'll be all right.'" Audible gasps sliced through the tension. "Did you ask what happened?" "No," he said, almost too quietly. "I didn't want to know." The prosecutor let the silence sit. "Why are you here now?" His voice didn't waver. "Because I'm tired of pretending I didn't know who he really was. I thought if I stayed quiet it would never touch me. But silence has a way of catching up." He looked out, not at the jury, not at Diddy, but somewhere distant perhaps at the version of himself who first chose not to speak. "I built a legacy, trying to outrun the shadows," he said. but you can't outrun what you refuse to confront. The prosecutor didn't interrupt. No one did. Did Sean Combs ever say anything that confirmed your suspicions? 2018, Jay-Z said. I asked him what really happened at those parties. He said, "Some things ain't for your kind of mind. Stay focused on your paper." He shrugged with a grim sort of knowing. And that was that. Mr. Carter, the prosecutor asked, voice lowering, at what point did your silence begin to feel like complicity? Jay-Z leaned forward, elbows resting on the edge of the stand. 2016. There was a party in Los Angeles, invite only, no press. He called it an industry reset, but it felt like a test. It started with a prayer circle, then turned into something else. He swallowed hard. I saw people escorted into rooms they didn't come out of for hours. I heard things I never wanted to hear, but the moment that broke me, his voice tightened. A girl, maybe 20, ran barefoot across the hall crying. Security caught her before she got to the elevator. Sean didn't flinch. He just said, "Handle that." And they did. A juror visibly recoiled. The judge didn't intervene. "And you did nothing?" the prosecutor asked softly. "I did what I'd always done," Jay-Z said bitterly. "I left." Was that when you began to pull away? That night, I told Beyonce never to be alone at one of his events again. I stopped sending artists from Rock Nation, but I didn't go public. I was still protecting the brand, his and mine. Did he ever confront you about the distance? 2 months later, he called, said, "You ungrateful, after all we built." I told him it was built on secrets. I'm done carrying them. And you never looked back? Not until 2020. That's when a file arrived. No sender, no subject, just a folder titled, "The House You Helped Build." What was inside? Jay-Z's voice thinned to a knife's edge. Screenshots, surveillance photos, NDAs, voice memos, and a transcript. Of what? A conversation between Sean and another artist, young, scared, begging to be let out of something, and in the audio, Sean says, "You signed it. You belong to this now." The gasp that followed was less sound, more seismic shift. I listened to that clip 3 times, and by the third, I realized I couldn't pretend anymore, not even to myself. What did you do? I severed everything. Quietly. No press release, no public spectacle. I pulled Rock Nation out of every pipeline involving Combs Enterprises. Why not come forward then? Because I knew what it meant. That stepping into this light meant tearing down someone people built their dreams around. I didn't want to be that person. But you're here now, because I realized the dreams weren't mine to protect. They were built on other people's nightmares. The prosecutor stepped back, her notes untouched. The gallery remained motionless. "Final question for now," she said. "In your own words, what was your turning point, the exact moment you knew you could never protect him again?" Jay-Z's eyes flickered. For the first time, his voice trembled. "February 2021, New York. Private dinner, just 10 of us. No press, no noise, just power." He paused, his throat working. He got loud near the end, celebratory. But then he said, "If any of these women start chirping, I've got receipts. Leverage. They talk, I bury them." He laughed. Everyone else laughed too. He looked down at his hands. But I didn't, because across the table, his assistant, this young woman, she just dropped her eyes, gripped her wine glass like it was the only thing keeping her from breaking. And I realized I wasn't just standing next to power, I was helping it stay silent. He looked up again, and the entire room held its breath. That night I crawled out from under him, and I left the silence behind. The judge didn't speak. He couldn't, because everyone understood something had shifted not just in the room, but in the air itself. Jay-Z wasn't testifying. He was detonating everything that had once held their world together. And that was only the beginning. The courtroom had never felt so still. The oxygen seemed different, heavier somehow, as if everyone inside was waiting for a second thunderclap after the first had already cracked the sky. Jay-Z remained in the witness chair, but he was no longer a man defending or accusing. He had become something else entirely, a mirror that no one wanted to look into but could not avoid. The judge called for a recess, but no one moved. The jury didn't rise. The gallery didn't shuffle. Even the court officers exchanged uncertain glances as though unsure if protocol still applied to a room that had just watched legacy bleed onto the floor. The silence was not absence, it was consequence. When the judge returned and gavelled the room back into order, it wasn't to restore control, it was to brace for what would come next. "The court calls its next witness," the prosecutor said calmly, but even she couldn't hide the undertone of gravity. "Mr. Leon Haskinson." The name rippled through the room like a rumor suddenly made real. Heads turned. Some in the gallery audibly gasped. Diddy sat upright, for the first time shifting in his seat. His jaw clenched, but his eyes betrayed something deeper recognition. Leon entered from the back, not from a side door like some secret weapon. He was tall, heavy-built, with a presence that didn't announce itself but demanded space. He wore a simple dark suit, no flashy tie, no performance in his posture, just steel. He took the oath with a voice so deep it resonated through the floorboards. "State your name for the record," the clerk prompted. "Leon Haskinson," he said, "former head of personal security for Sean Commies." The words dropped like stones in a pond already full of ripples. Diddy didn't look at him. Leon didn't look at Diddy either. The prosecutor stepped forward with care, like walking toward a bomb she didn't know the size of yet. "Mr. Haskinson," she began, "were you present for the events Mr. Carter described in his testimony?" Leon nodded once. "Most of them." "And can you confirm what he said about the parties, the NDAs, the atmosphere of control?" His voice was steady. "Yes, all of it. I was there." "Did you ever witness individuals being removed from events under suspicious circumstances?" "Plenty of times," he said without flinching. "People who panicked, people who tried to leave, people who saw something they weren't supposed to." "And what happened to them?" Leon looked straight ahead. "They were handled." "Did you handle them?" she asked. "Not directly. My orders were to report to Sean's inner circle. His handlers did the rest." "Were you asked to cover up incidents?" "I was told not to document anything, to confiscate phones, to erase footage. I signed NDAs, but I kept my own records, dates, names. I kept them because one day I knew I might have to answer for the things I didn't say out loud." The gallery leaned in, breaths barely audible. "Why now?" she asked. "Why speak now?" Leon's gaze dropped for a second. "Because I have daughters, because Jay-Z stood up, and because truth doesn't wait forever." "Did Mr. Combs ever threaten you directly?" Not with fists, Leon said, but with futures. He'd say, "You like that house, right? That school your kid goes to? Never commands, just reminders, but loud ones." The judge watched closely, but didn't interrupt. This was not courtroom theatrics. This was collapse in real time. The prosecutor adjusted her posture. "Mr. Haskinson, can you describe a specific event that made you question your silence?" He didn't blink. "December 2014. Mansion party in Beverly Hills. Tight security. No press, no cameras. Sean told me personally. No phones, no slips, no stories. I knew what that meant. It was the same setup every time. But this night, something shifted." He paused, and his voice dropped. "A young woman barely out of her teens stumbled out of one of the upstairs rooms. Lipstick smeared, one heel missing. Eyes wide like she was trying to remember where she was. She whispered to me, 'Please get me out.' I opened the back gate, walked her straight to a car. Paid for it myself. Never told Sean. I just couldn't do it anymore." The room was so quiet that even the hum of the lights sounded accusatory. "Did you know what happened to her?" the prosecutor asked. "No," Leon said, "but I saw what she looked like before, and I saw what she looked like after. That was enough." "Were there other nights like that?" "Too many." "Did others know?" He looked toward the back of the courtroom. "They all did. Assistants, managers, artists. Some looked away, some played dumb, but no one said no to Sean, because saying no meant losing everything." The prosecutor steadied her voice. "Do you believe Mr. Carter's testimony was truthful?" 100%, Leon said without hesitation. "Have you spoken to him since he testified?" "No," he replied, "but I sent him one message." "What did it say?" "Thank you for starting the fire." A few jurors shifted, one brushing tears without lifting her pen. The air had grown thick again, but it wasn't tension anymore. It was awakening. The judge leaned forward, but didn't speak. Not yet. "Mr. Haskinson," the prosecutor continued, "what would you say to others who were part of this machine and still remain silent?" He looked out toward the gallery, but his voice was for those beyond it. "You've already lost your soul. Don't lose your voice, too." The prosecutor turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution rests for now." The judge nodded slowly, deliberately. "Let the record show," he said, his voice low and steady, "that this courtroom has become more than a legal forum. It has become a reckoning." But he wasn't finished. "Mr. Haskinson," the judge asked, "do you still have those records?" Leon nodded. "Yes, in a safe, dated, indexed, backed up in multiple locations, and I'm ready to hand them over." And the judge didn't hide the shift in his face, not surprise, not fear, but the solemn realization that this trial had just changed dimensions. The defense team exchanged hurried notes, their calm cracking at the edges. One leaned over to Diddy and whispered. Diddy didn't respond. His hands were clenched in fists that didn't tremble but didn't move either, like he'd just realized the walls were closing in from the inside. Jay-Z, still seated in the witness chair, hadn't said a word, but his presence remained like a burn mark. He had become the match. And now the fire was spreading, no longer confined to whispers or rooms where phones were confiscated or contracts inked in fear. It was here now, in the open, in sworn statements, in the unflinching eyes of men who had once stood beside the devil and finally chose to step away from his shadow. The court adjourned for the day, but no one felt released. As people filed out of the room, there were no loud conversations, no laughter, no clicking heels or rustling papers, just quiet footsteps. Some eyes were red, some mouths drawn tight. Everyone was carrying something they hadn't come in with. Jay-Z stood slowly. He didn't look at Diddy Combe. He didn't need to. Because what had been said could never be unsaid. Because the silence that once protected power was now power's undoing, and the storm was only beginning. They came early that morning, long before the courtroom doors opened. Reporters pressed shoulder to shoulder outside the courthouse gates, their breath visible in the winter air, their lenses already fogged with anticipation. The world had heard what Jay-Z said. They had watched Leon Haskinson drop the illusion like a stone into still waters. Now everyone was waiting for the ripples to become waves. Diddy Combe arrived the way he always did, shielded, guarded, wrapped in silence like a shroud. But the difference now was that the silence no longer protected him. It made him look like a man walking into a fire he thought he could control. He didn't speak. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, but his steps betrayed something deeper, a crack in the rhythm, a hesitation between strides that used to be absolute. Inside, the gallery was filled before the clock even struck 9. Attorneys whispered over folders. Jurors exchanged glances that no longer held neutrality. The judge took his seat with a heaviness that suggested sleep had not visited him easily. The court clerk announced the session's resumption, and the prosecutor stood slowly, her notes thinner now, not because the story was over, but because so much of it had been told without paper. "Your Honor," she said, "the prosecution would like to recall Mr. Sean Carter to the stand." There was a brief hush, then movement as Jay-Z emerged again, not from a green room, not from behind a velvet curtain, but from the same hallway everyone else used. No special treatment, no press manager, just him. He looked smaller today, not physically, but spiritually, like a man who had emptied something heavy from his chest, only to realize the space left behind was still echoing. He took the stand again, and the clerk swore him in once more. He didn't look at Diddy Combe. This time, he didn't even glance at the gallery. His eyes stayed with the prosecutor. "Mr. Carter," she began gently, "in your testimony, you spoke of events that spanned over a decade. We'd like to narrow our focus today to a single moment, one that hasn't yet been addressed." He gave a faint nod. "Do you recall an email exchange in August of 2017 between yourself and Mr. Combs?" "I do," he said. "In that exchange, you invited Mr. Combs to a private meeting at a secluded estate in Connecticut, correct?" "Yes." "And present at that meeting were 2 female artists, both unsigned at the time?" "Yes." "Did you remain at that meeting for its duration?" "No," he said, his voice quieter now. "I left early. I had a flight. Have you since spoken to either of those women?" "I have," he said, the words catching slightly. "One of them reached out to me last year." "And what did she say?" Jay-Z shifted in his seat. "She asked me why I let him bring her there. She asked why I didn't warn her." His eyes didn't move from the prosecutor's. "And I didn't have an answer." "Did she tell you what happened after you left?" "She didn't need to," he said. "Her voice was enough. The way she said my name, it wasn't anger. It was betrayal." The prosecutor paused. "So you admit responsibility?" "I do," he said. "Not for what happened to her directly, but for giving him access, for offering him legitimacy when I should have offered him distance." The defense shifted uneasily. Diddy Combs' lawyers scribbled furiously, But Jay-Z didn't notice or didn't care. His voice was no longer a scalpel. It had become a hammer. "Why now, Mr. Carter?" the prosecutor asked again. "Why not a documentary, a press release, a carefully written op-ed in a glossy magazine?" He exhaled. "Because I built my name on truth, and then I protected a lie. This," he gestured around the courtroom, "is the only place where truth counts." The gallery was silent. Even the judge looked down for a moment, not out of distraction, but reverence. "Mr. Carter," the prosecutor continued, "do you understand that by admitting your role in enabling Mr. Comey's, you open yourself up to legal and financial consequences?" "I do," he said. "And you accept them?" "I already have." "Why?" she asked again. And this time his answer was slower, measured. "Because the culture deserves to hear this here. Not in lyrics, not in rumors, but under oath." She nodded. "We have one final exhibit to present before we close your testimony." She held up a small black binder and handed it to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. The prosecutor continued. "Contained in this binder are several email chains, voice memos, and guest lists from a series of events between 2012 and 2019 events in which phones were confiscated, guests were screened, and recordings were banned. Do you recognize these documents?" "Yes," Jay-Z replied. "They're authentic?" "They are." The judge looked through the binder slowly and then returned it. "Mr. Carter," the prosecutor asked, her tone dipping low again, "were these events social or professional?" "They were pitched as business," he said. "Brand expansion, network building. But by the end, you realized what they really were?" "By the time you realize," he said softly, "you're already in too deep to walk out without setting something on fire." "And did you? Eventually? Did you ever witness criminal acts firsthand?" His answer took longer. "Not directly. But I saw people get paid to shut up. I saw women escorted out of rooms looking nothing like how they arrived. I saw fear. I saw shame. I saw the aftermath. Why didn't you walk away after the first red flag?" "Because I told myself the same lie everyone tells themselves in this industry," he said, "that this is just how it works, that trauma is tradition, that exclusivity excuses everything, and slowly you lose your compass." "When did you get it back?" "The first time my daughter Googled me," he said quietly. And no one in the room asked him to elaborate. They didn't have to. "Are there others who know what you know?" "Yes." "Will they come forward?" "Some already have. Some never will. Some can't afford to." "And you?" "I made war with silence," he said, "and I'm still fighting." "Mr. Carter," she said, "one final question. What would you say to the artists, the fans, the culture, those who idolized your friendship with Mr. Combs?" Jay-Z looked out at the room not with arrogance, not with regret, but with something raw. "I'd say don't confuse influence with integrity. Don't mistake legacy for righteousness. We were legends on paper, but off paper we protected a monster. And I won't do that again." The prosecutor stepped back slowly. There was nothing left to say. But Jay-Z didn't leave the stand right away. He turned just slightly and looked at Diddy. Not with vengeance, not even with pity, but with mourning. Because what he had dismantled was not just a man. It was a brotherhood, a belief, a system built not just on power, but on what people were willing to ignore to stay near it. And now there was nothing left to ignore. The truth was here, spoken, and the room would never be the same again. By the time the courtroom doors reopened the following morning, the world had already shifted. Headlines ran wild, not with sensational gossip, but with a new kind of weight. Jay-Z testifies against Diddy. We were legends on paper. Video clips of the transcript were animated by AI and stitched into TikToks with somber music. On Instagram, artists who once owed their careers to Diddy posted black squares, cryptic captions, or worse, nothing at all. Silence had been power for decades. Now it felt like evidence. Outside the courthouse, the crowd doubled. Inside, the tension thickened. Diddy entered with his lawyers, his posture still tall, still rehearsed, but his eyes were sunken now, no longer scanning for optics. He was no longer performing power. He was surviving it. The judge took his seat slowly, and there was something in his hands that hadn't been there before. A small envelope marked with the federal seal. "Before we proceed," he said, "this court has received new materials from the prosecution, including sworn affidavits and digital recordings previously undisclosed." He handed the envelope to the clerk and gestured to the prosecutor. She stood with a quiet authority that didn't need volume to command attention. "Your Honor, with your permission, we would like to call a supplemental witness, Miss Talia Jensen." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The name was not familiar to the public. There was no artist catalog attached, no former interview clips floating online. But when Talia entered the room, silence fell like a shroud. She looked nothing like someone who belonged in front of a courtroom gallery. No glam squad, no practiced expression. Just a woman in her mid-30s, wearing a navy sweater and flats, her hair tied back in a way that said survival mattered more than presentation. She was sworn in with trembling fingers, but her voice didn't shake. "State your name for the record." "Talia Jensen." "Occupation?" "Former administrative assistant for Mr. Sean Combs, from 2011 to 2017. Diddy's jaw tightened. The defense team adjusted in their chairs. The prosecutor nodded gently. "Ms. Jensen, you've chosen to testify today voluntarily, correct?" "Yes." "Were you ever forced to sign non-disclosure agreements?" "Yes." "Were you ever threatened if you broke them?" "Yes," she said, and the word cracked like glass. "How?" "It wasn't direct," she said, "but he would say things like, 'Loose ends get tied off.' He'd joke about people disappearing. He'd laugh, but you knew you weren't supposed to." "Can you confirm you were present at private events described in Mr. Carter's testimony?" "Yes." "Can you describe your role?" "I managed the guest lists, arranged the transportation, booked the locations. I was told who to allow in, who to remove, what names to leave off any official record." "Did you ever witness anything you believed to be criminal?" She swallowed. "Yes." "Can you elaborate?" "There was one night," she said, voice dropping. "March 2016, Miami. A girl, she was young, too young. I don't know how she got invited. I saw her leave one of the rooms upstairs with her dress torn. She couldn't speak, just shook. Security tried to take her out the back, but I ran to her first. I gave her my number. She never called. I still have the scrap of paper she wrote her name on, Sophia. I never saw her again." No one breathed. The room had become more than a legal space. It had become a graveyard of memory. "Ms. Jensen," the prosecutor said carefully, "why are you coming forward now?" "Because Jay-Z came forward," she said, voice cracking now. And if someone like him, someone with everything to lose, can say it out loud, then what excuse do I have? Did you ever try to speak up before? Once, I told another assistant. The next day, my desk was cleared out. No explanation. But hours later, Diddy texted me. What did he say? He said, "Snitches bleed checks, that's all." The judge flinched. A juror looked away. The weight of the system pressed down on everyone, and it wasn't theoretical anymore. It had a voice, a name, a texture. Fear was not abstract. It had lived among them for years. "Did you keep any documentation?" the prosecutor asked. Talia nodded slowly. "I backed up every file I was ever told to delete. Every email, every call log. I stored them under a decoy folder labeled Calendar Templates. I still have the drive. Would you be willing to submit that drive to the court?" "Yes." "Why did you keep it all?" "Because something in me always knew the truth would matter. Someday, even if no one believed me, even if I had to wait for the world to catch up." The prosecutor stood in silence for a beat, then walked the drive over to the clerk. As the judge accepted it, the moment felt almost sacred, not because of its size, but because of what it might contain: proof. Not rumors, not whispers, actual evidence. The defense team scrambled, one attorney whispering furiously to another. Diddy didn't move. When Talia stepped down, she didn't glance at Diddy. She didn't need to. What she carried wasn't vengeance, it was relief, like finally placing down a bag you'd been forced to carry for too long. The judge called for a recess. The gallery exhaled as one, but no one dared leave their seats. They were part of something now, not just watching history, watching a reckoning. Jay-Z returned to the courtroom as Talia exited, and for a brief second, their eyes met. They didn't nod. They didn't speak. But in that shared silence, a new truth was born. One built not on loyalty, not on fame, but on something simpler. Decency, accountability, enough. When the judge returned, he held a transcript in his hands. "This court has reviewed the contents of the submitted drive," he said, his voice slow, every word deliberate. "And we have confirmed correspondence, audio files, and guest logs consistent with previous testimony. In light of this new evidence, this court will proceed with redirect and closing statements." The defense lawyer rose slowly, his face carefully arranged. "Your Honor, we maintain that all testimony has been circumstantial and emotionally charged. Mr. Commies denies all wrongdoing and reserves the right to respond in full during the defense phase." "That right is noted," the judge replied. But his voice didn't carry authority anymore. It carried exhaustion. Because everyone in that room, even the defense, knew the ground had shifted. Jay-Z remained seated. His presence still cast a long shadow, but it wasn't the shadow of a celebrity anymore. It was the silhouette of someone who had faced the mirror and chosen the harder road. And now, others were following. Leon, Talia, more names expected, more truths to surface, but something essential had already been broken open. The courtroom was no longer just a battleground for justice. It had become a confessional for an entire industry. One brick had been pulled, and now the wall was coming down. As the judge dismissed the room for the day, reporters ran to their phones. Artists issued statements, some filled with support, others laced with fear. The internet did what the internet does: digested, reposted, speculated. But in the courtroom, where it really mattered, The silence finally meant something else. It didn't mean surrender. It meant the end of pretending, the end of power without conscience, and the beginning of something that could not be unspoken again. By the time the final day of the trial arrived, the courthouse felt like a theater at the end of a season, the audience still coming, the players weary, the script evolving into something no one had rehearsed. The gallery filled again, tighter than ever, with people who had flown across the country just to sit in silence and witness a legacy dismantle itself piece by piece. Not just Diddy Combs' legacy, but their own memories of what he represented. Their mixtapes, their summers, their playlists and posters and nostalgic illusions. Jay-Z walked in without announcement. No tie, no jewelry, just the steady presence of a man who had lost friends, clout, maybe even future deals, but who had finally reclaimed something heavier, the right to speak without fear. Diddy Comb was already seated, surrounded by a legal team that looked more like a damage control unit now than defenders of innocence. He hadn't spoken publicly once since the trial began, but he had glared, nodded, scribbled, clenched. Today he didn't do any of those. Today he stared blankly ahead like a man watching his name etched into stone under a headline he never approved. The judge entered, and no gavel was needed. Everyone was already quiet. The weight of the previous 4 chapters lingered in the air like the final breath before a verdict. The prosecutor stood. Her suit no longer looked like armor. It looked like resolve. "Your Honor," she said, "with the court's permission, we call one final witness." There was a pause, a deliberate silence as people tried to guess who it could be. The room had already seen Jay-Z confess, Leon confirm, and Talia reveal. What more could possibly be said? The bailiff opened the door, and a man in his early 40s stepped in. Clean-shaven, quiet, not famous, just steady. "State your name for the record," the clerk asked. "Aaron Duvall," he said, "former IT administrator for Combs Enterprises." The prosecutor nodded. "Mr. Duvall, you managed digital infrastructure for Mr. Combs's organization between 2013 and 2021. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And what did that role entail?" "Servers, email encryption, backups, security protocols, cloud access logs, internal surveillance systems." That last phrase rang in the air like a fire alarm no one had pulled. "Excuse me," the prosecutor said slowly. "Internal surveillance systems?" "Yes," he replied. "Cameras placed in private events, meeting rooms, guest estates. They were not connected to public networks. They were streamed to isolated hardware kept in secure vaults." "And who had access to that hardware?" "Only Mr. Combs and 2 others. I was not one of them." "So, how do you know what was on those drives?" "Because I was ordered to erase them," he said, "and I didn't." The courtroom didn't gasp. It sank, like the floor itself dropped an inch. "I made mirrored backups every time I was asked to wipe a drive," Aaron continued. "I stored them on external hardware disguised as router firmware, hidden in plain sight. I brought one with me today." The judge sat straighter. The defense team flinched. "Mr. Duvall," the prosecutor asked, her voice edged with disbelief, "can you confirm what's on that drive?" "Footage," he said, "of multiple events between 2015 and 2020. Audio files, conversations, agreements, payouts, a pattern of coercion disguised as opportunity." "Have you viewed this footage recently?" "I viewed one file last week," he said, "after Jay-Z's testimony." "What did it contain?" He paused. A conversation between Mr. Combums and an unnamed artist. She is crying. He is offering her a necklace. She refuses. He says, "Then take the money. You already signed. You're already in." A chill crept through the room like wind beneath a locked door. Do you believe Mr. Commies understood the illegality of his behavior? Yes, Aaron replied. He had protocols in place, people trained to handle fallout, rooms with no Wi-Fi, private vaults with physical keys. He didn't just commit acts, he engineered invisibility. Why come forward now? She asked him. Because the men who made the music I loved turned out to be better at silence than sound, Aaron said, and because I didn't want my sons to grow up worshiping a lie. The judge looked at him for a long moment before speaking. Mr. Duvall, are you prepared to surrender that drive to federal custody? I am. The bailiff took the hardware gently, as if holding something radioactive. And maybe he was, because what rested in that palm was not just evidence. It was confirmation. The things people suspected, whispered about, speculated, they weren't shadows anymore. They had faces, timestamps, audio, reality. The prosecutor rested her hand on the table and said nothing more. She didn't have to. The case had already passed beyond the need for argument. The defense attorney rose, but his body language had shifted entirely. He no longer stood like a man about to win. He stood like a man trying to minimize damage to what was left. Your Honor, he began, we acknowledge the profound weight of the testimonies delivered in this courtroom. Mr. Commies maintains his position of innocence and asserts that the material evidence has yet to be verified through due forensic process. That said, in light of the ongoing investigation, we reserve all rights for formal rebuttal at a later phase. The judge nodded slowly, then turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, you have now heard all evidence presented. You are dismissed for deliberation. And the jury filed out, but no one relaxed. No one even exhaled. 34 minutes passed before the door opened again. The room was still full. Not a single person had left. The jury foreperson handed a slip of paper to the bailiff, who walked it to the judge. He opened it slowly, silently, then placed it face down on the bench. Will the defendant please rise? He said, and Diddy stood, flanked by two attorneys. Jay-Z did not watch him. He was looking at the floor. The judge read the verdict with a voice like granite. On the charge of conspiracy to obstruct justice, guilty. On the charge of unlawful surveillance, guilty. On the charge of coercion by abuse of power, guilty. On the charge of emotional and financial manipulation of dependent contractors, guilty. He paused. Sentencing to follow at a later date. Bail is revoked. The defendant will be remanded into custody, effective immediately. Gasps followed, a few cries. One woman in the gallery covered her mouth. The rest remained frozen. The silence now was different than any other silence that had fallen in this courtroom. It wasn't dread, it wasn't fear, it was something closer to reverence. The kind of stillness that follows truth when it finally finishes screaming. Diddy didn't speak. He didn't resist. He was escorted out of the courtroom in silence, and no one reached out. No cameras flashed, no reporters yelled questions. Only the soft echo of footsteps on a waxed marble floor. Jay-Z remained seated for several more minutes, long after most people had risen. The prosecutor approached him not as an opponent, not even as an officer of the court, but as a witness to something she knew would outlive all of them. Thank you, she said quietly. I didn't do it for thanks, he replied. I did it because I ran out of excuses." "And what will you do now?" she asked. He looked at her for the first time that day. "Try to be the man my daughter thinks I already am." And the courtroom emptied slowly. Not because anyone was forced to stay, but because no one wanted to leave. Outside, the sun was low, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Reporters spoke into cameras. Artists released carefully worded statements. Fans argued online, but none of it mattered here. Here, in this space where legends once protected monsters, a new story had been written. One not about fame or betrayal, but about reckoning. About what happens when silence finally breaks, and what rises from the ashes it leaves behind.